Welcome to the show we're in. News to share, where to begin. Free sides to every tale we tell. The truth is here, it's ringing bells. Dive in deep, let's take a look. In every twist and turn we took. For glory lies within the truth. We're chasing facts, it's our pursuit.
Imagine a gas station attendant and a janitor amassing a fortune of $8 million.
Oh.
That's the true story of Ronald Read. And it kind of perfectly illustrates, I think, the core idea behind Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Oh, interesting.
The book we're diving into today,
Okay.
we're going to be pulling out some really insightful excerpts to understand why we act the way we do with money
Okay.
and what you
Yeah.
can learn from it.
I love that book.
Oh, it's so good.
It's such a good book. What's so intriguing about it is that it's not about becoming some kind of financial wizard or memorizing complex formulas.
Right.
Right. He dives deep into this oftentimes overlooked reality that our relationship with money is more about behavior and psychology than it is about raw intelligence.
Okay, let's unpack this. So Ronald Read's story is a prime example of this, right? It wasn't market savvy or risky bets that made him a multimillionaire. He was a janitor. This really challenges the traditional narratives around wealth, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You see, we tend to think of finance as this fixed set of rules, almost like physics. But the reality is it's deeply entwined. Human psychology. With those often hidden emotional forces that traditional financial advice often misses.
So in a way, understanding our own psychology is just as important as understanding the stock market.
Precisely. Housel argues that each of us has a unique money story, personal narrative, shaped by our individual experiences. It's as if we're all looking at money through a lens crafted by a very specific and limited set of events in our own past.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So we're all walking around with these personal money scripts playing in our heads. But how does that actually impact our financial decisions?
Well, let's look at a study Housel highlights. Economists found that people who live through periods of high inflation invest very differently compared to those who haven't. Their fear of inflation, rooted in their personal history, outweighs almost any other factor. It makes total sense when you think about it. My grandmother hoarded cash her whole life because she lived through the Depression.
Right.
You know?
It's like those stories we hear about lottery winners who end up broke. What might seem irrational to someone on the outside makes perfect sense within their financial reality and personal experience.
Exactly. And this brings us to a crucial point. Judging someone's financial choices without understanding their unique money story is like reading the last page of a novel and thinking, you know.
A whole plot. It just leads to a whole lot of misunderstandings.
So the first step to making smarter financial choices is to really understand our own money story, right? To figure out where our beliefs and behaviors around money come from.
Precisely. Now, here's another layer. Housel adds to the mix the powerful and often invisible roles of luck and risk.
Okay, take Bill Gates, for example. Yes, the guy's a genius, but he was also incredibly lucky to be at the forefront of the personal computer revolution.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
We often celebrate successful people solely for their talent and hard work, but we forget that luck plays a huge role.
And it's important to remember that risk is the flip side of that lucky coin. For every Bill Gates, there are countless others who were just as talented and hardworking, but didn't get the same lucky breaks.
Right.
Imagine all the brilliant almost wers who simply weren't in the right place at the right time.
So I guess, in a way, we shouldn't judge success or failure too harshly, whether our own or someone else's, because those unseen forces of luck and risk are always at play.
Exactly. It's a humbling reminder that while we should certainly strive to make smart financial choices, acknowledging the role of these external factors helps us develop a more balanced and realistic perspective.
Okay, so we've got our unique money stories playing out and the unpredictable forces of luck and risk swirling around us. But what happens when our risk tolerance goes too far? Housel introduces this intriguing concept called the Vanderbilt paradox.
Ah, yes. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the ruthless railroad tycoon.
Yeah.
He was wildly successful, but also notorious for bending or breaking the rules to get ahead. His story really highlights the tension between achieving massive success and potentially doing things that are ethically questionable or extremely risky.
So is this Vanderbilt paradox,
Yeah.
saying that we should be cautious about who we view as role models in the financial world, because maybe their path to success isn't one we want to replicate.
Exactly. And here's
Yeah.
another fascinating twist. Even Benjamin Graham, considered the father of value investing and someone known for his conservative approach, had a huge portion of his wealth tied up in a single stock at one point.
Wait, didn't Graham literally write the book on diversification? So he wasn't always practicing what he preached.
That's the irony. Even the greats can be susceptible to
Mm-hmm.
concentrated bets that go against their own advice. It's almost like the line between a bold, calculated risk and recklessness can be blurry, often only becoming clear in hindsight.
That's a bit unsettling. So how do we navigate that uncertainty? How do we make smart choices without being paralyzed by the fear
Yeah.
of making a mistake?
That's where Housel's idea of enough comes in.
Okay.
He recounts this powerful story about his time as a valet parking Ferraris for people who flaunted their wealth but didn't seem truly happy. He contrasts this with a friend who found his version of enough at 22, built a life around his passions, and was genuinely content.
So enough isn't necessarily about hitting some magic number in your bank account.
Yeah.
It's more about finding that sense of contentment, knowing when you have enough to live a fulfilling life without constantly chasing more.
Exactly. And this is where we start to challenge some of the traditional narratives around wealth. Think about it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, real wealth isn't about impressing others with fancy cars and expensive clothes. True wealth is about what you don't spend. It's about having the freedom and options to design a life that aligns with your values, not someone else's.
Okay, that's a powerful shift in perspective. But it also brings up another important point. Saving. How does Housel view saving in the grand scheme of building wealth?
He emphasizes that saving is the foundation, not the finish line. He draws this interesting analogy to the 1970s oil crisis. The ultimate solution wasn't finding more oil, but rather figuring out how to use less energy to be more efficient.
So are you saying that just like finding ways to use less energy had a
Yeah.
bigger impact than simply finding more oil? Learning to save consistently allows us to achieve more with the resources we already have.
Exactly. And this goes back to the idea that wealth is relative. It's not about hitting some arbitrary number or keeping up with some external standard. True wealth is about aligning your financial resources with your needs, values, and priorities, not someone else's.
I love that. It takes the pressure off, trying to keep up with the Joneses. But let's be honest, investing isn't always purely rational, is it? We all make decisions based on emotions sometimes, and our gut feelings don't always align with what the spreadsheets are telling us.
You're absolutely right. Housel points out that investing is as much about psychology
Yeah.
as it is about math.
Yeah.
He even tells a funny story about Nobel Prize-winning economist Harry Markowitz, you know the guy, who literally developed the mathematical framework for portfolio optimization. He didn't even invest his own money the way his theories.
Prescribe. Okay, that is hilarious. So even the experts sometimes struggle with balancing logic and emotion. When it comes to money, what's the takeaway here? Are we doomed to repeat these mistakes?
Not at all. What's fascinating here is that sometimes the right financial decision isn't always the most rational one. There's a lot of wisdom in recognizing that sometimes. Minimizing future regret, supporting a cause you're passionate about, or simply investing in something that brings you joy outweighs pure cold logic.
So it's about finding that balance between being reasonable and being rational.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And speaking of finding balance, let's talk about those unpredictable tales that Housel dedicates a whole section to. Those outlier events that can completely reshape our financial lives.
So we're talking about those unexpected events, like the dot-com bubble or the 2008 financial crisis.
Right.
Events that seemed to come out of nowhere, but had a massive impact on the entire economy.
Exactly. These tales are what Housel calls those rare but incredibly influential events that shape not only companies and investments, but even entire careers. Think about venture capital, where a single home run investment can more than make up for a dozen failures. It's a perfect example of how these outliers drive everything.
So these unpredictable tail events are almost inevitable. How do we factor them in to our financial planning? It seems impossible to plan.
Oh, the unknown. It goes back to what we discussed earlier about having a margin of safety, allowing room for error in your financial life, understanding that these tail events exist means accepting a certain level of volatility as part of the journey. It's the price we pay for the potential of long-term growth and the ability to navigate those unexpected turns.
So trying to avoid volatility altogether, it's kind of like trying to win the lottery
Yeah,
without buying a ticket. It's not a realistic strategy, is it?
exactly. Housel used the example of Jack Welch,
Oh.
the former CEO of GE. He was obsessed with smooth, predictable earnings. But this obsession actually masked deeper problems within the company and ultimately led to a massive decline.
So accepting volatility as part of the process,
Yeah.
rather than fearing it, is crucial for long-term financial well-being. But how do we distinguish between normal market ups and downs and those irrational bubbles that Housel talks about?
Ugh, bubbles. They're a fascinating case study because they're driven by a different kind of irrationality. It's not so much that people are delusional about the long-term value. Instead, they're often chasing short-term momentum, riding the wave up until it inevitably crashes.
So they're making perfectly rational decisions within their own very short time frames, even if the overall picture is unsustainable. Kind of like those day traders in the dot-com bubble.
Precisely. They were making profits, riding that wave up until it all came crashing down. And that brings us to another key psychological factor that Housel explores, the end of history illusion.
I'm intrigued. What's that all about?
It's the idea that we consistently underestimate how much will change over time. We tend to look at our current selves, our current desires and needs, and assume they'll remain constant. But life rarely works that way.
Because of this end of history illusion can trip us up when we make long-term financial plans.
Right.
Because who we are at 20
All right.
is likely very different from who we'll be at 40.
Exactly. We need to factor in flexibility. Housel tells us. Great anecdote about a friend who achieved all his initial financial goals only to realize his priorities had shifted drastically in the process. It's a powerful reminder that who you are, what you value, and what truly matters to you evolves over time.
So it's important to build flexibility
Yep.
into our financial plans, to acknowledge that our wants and needs will inevitably change as we do.
That's the key takeaway here. Avoid those overly rigid, long-term financial plans that lock you into a path that might not align with your future self.
This is all making me rethink my own
Oh,
financial plans. But before we get too introspective, I want to dive into another intriguing point Housel makes. The seduction of pessimism. Why is it that even when things are objectively getting better, we seem drawn to the negative?
Well, for one thing, pessimism often sounds more intelligent. It gives the illusion of a deeper understanding of the world.
I see what you mean. It's almost like being optimistic is naive,
Yeah.
while being pessimistic is somehow more sophisticated and realistic.
Exactly. And remember, bad news is usually more attention grabbing. It's like that old saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
That's so true. Think about the media's constant focus on negative economic news. Even when the long-term trends are pointing in a positive direction, it's easy to get swept up in that negativity.
And remember, progress often happens gradually and quietly in the background, while setbacks are usually sudden and dramatic. That makes pessimism a lot easier to narrate, to fit into a compelling story.
So it's almost like pessimism is the easier, more appealing story to tell, even if it doesn't reflect the whole picture. Speaking of stories, Housel also talks about how narratives can sometimes overpower the numbers, particularly when it comes to financial decisions. What's he getting at there?
He argues that we're not just responding to data, we're responding to the stories we tell ourselves about that data. He uses the 2008 financial crisis as a prime example. The loss of confidence in this system amplified the downturn, even though the underlying economic damage might not have warranted such a severe reaction on its own.
So it's like we're all living in our own financial movie, complete with heroes, villains, and a specific narrative arc.
Precisely. And the problem is that we're naturally drawn to narratives that confirm our existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are flawed or incomplete. This is where things can get really dangerous because those narratives can lead us to make decisions that are not in our best interest.
So how do we guard against that? How do we make sure we're not letting narratives hijack our financial decisions and lead us down the wrong path?
It's tough, but Housel emphasizes the importance of being aware of our own biases. We need to recognize that we're all susceptible to letting narratives, especially those that confirm our existing worldview, cloud our judgment.
Okay, so awareness is key, but what about those times when we genuinely need financial advice? How do we know who to trust? Housel has a great story about a dentist who starts doling out unsolicited investment advice during an appointment.
It highlights the danger of taking advice from people whose expertise lies elsewhere. Just because someone is successful in one area doesn't mean they're qualified to give financial advice.
So how do we find trustworthy sources of information and advice, especially in a world where everyone seems to be a self-proclaimed expert?
That's a question we'll explore further as we continue our deep dive into the psychology of money. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on the key insights we've uncovered so far.
That sounds like a great place to pause.
Before the break, we were talking about finding trustworthy sources of information, and it is such a crucial point because in a world overflowing with financial experts, it's easy to get lost in the noise.
That's so true. Everyone seems to have an opinion on what we should be doing with our money. It's almost overwhelming.
And remember, a lot of that advice is driven by agendas, whether it's someone trying to sell you a product, a particular worldview, or just boost their own ego.
So how do we develop that inner bullshit detector to filter through all the noise and make informed financial decisions?
Well, a great starting point is to understand your own money story, those deep-seated beliefs and behaviors we discussed earlier. Once you recognize those patterns, you can start to question whether your financial decisions are truly aligned with your own values and goals, or if they're being influenced by external pressures.
So self-awareness is key. But what about those practical steps we can take to improve our financial well-being? What are some actionable takeaways from Housel's book that our listener can start implementing today?
One of the most powerful concepts Housel introduces is the idea of enough. It's about defining what truly matters to you and aligning your financial choices with those values rather than constantly chasing some external standard of success.
It's about getting off that hedonic treadmill of always wanting more right.
Exactly. Finding contentment with what you have while still striving for growth and improvement is a key element of financial well-being. It's about recognizing that true wealth isn't about accumulating stuff. It's about having the freedom and flexibility to live life on your own terms.
And of course, we can't forget the importance of saving. Housel makes it clear that saving is the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Absolutely. Building that financial buffer allows you to weather those inevitable storms and seize opportunities when they arise. Remember Housel's analogy of the 1970s oil crisis. Sometimes the smartest solution is not to find more resources, but to become more efficient with what you already have.
That's a great reminder that we don't always need more. We just need to manage what we have more effectively. But what about those unseen forces of luck and risk that we talked about earlier? How do we factor those into our decision-making?
Recognize that both are always at play, both in your own life and in the lives of others. Avoid making judgments based solely on outcomes. Someone's success might be more attributable to luck than skill, and vice versa.
So a little humility goes a long way when assessing both our own financial journeys and those of others.
Absolutely. And remember those unpredictable tail events, those outlier occurrences that can have a massive impact, both positive and negative. Building in a margin of safety, having that financial cushion, can help you navigate those turbulent times and even capitalize on opportunities that emerge from chaos.
So it's about playing the long game, recognizing that financial success is a journey, not a destination. And a big part of that journey is being comfortable with things not always going according to plan.
Precisely. Embrace the reality that not every investment, not every financial decision will be a home run. There will be strikeouts along the way. But it's how we learn from those setbacks, how we adapt and adjust our strategy that ultimately determines our long-term success.
So it's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them and keep moving forward.
Exactly. Now here's another fascinating thread Housel weaves throughout the book. He argues that true wealth is about using your money to gain control over your time.
Okay, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
How does that play out in practical terms?
Think about it. Having the freedom to choose how you spend your time, to pursue your passions, to be present with your loved ones, isn't that the ultimate goal?
I see what you mean. Money, in a way, becomes a tool to design a life that reflects your values and priorities. But isn't there a danger in becoming too obsessed with money?
Absolutely. And Housel makes a very important point about the role of humility and generosity. He argues that flaunting your wealth is unlikely to earn you genuine respect or admiration.
So it's not about keeping up with the Joneses or trying to impress people with material possessions. It's about finding true contentment and connecting with others on a deeper level.
Precisely. True wealth encompasses more than just the numbers in your bank account. It's about living a life of purpose and meaning aligned with your values. Now, going back to those narratives we talked about earlier, we need to be mindful of the stories we're consuming and the messages they're sending.
So we need to be critical thinkers questioning the narratives that are constantly being thrown at us, especially when it comes to financial information. How do we do that effectively?
It's about separating the signal from the noise, understanding that many of these narratives are designed to sell us something or to confirm our existing biases. Develop those critical thinking skills. Ask questions, challenge assumptions. Don't just accept everything at face value.
So we've got self-awareness, contentment, saving risk management, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Anything else our listeners should keep in mind as they navigate their own financial journey?
One of the most important takeaways from the psychology of money is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to financial success. Your journey is unique. What works for one person might not work for another.
So we need to find what works for us, what aligns with our own values, goals, and risk tolerance.
Exactly. It's about experimenting, learning from your mistakes, and adapting your approach as you go. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about something Housel brings up towards the end of the book, the history of the American consumer.
Okay, this sounds fascinating. Why does he delve into this historical perspective? What's the connection to personal finance?
Housel takes us on a journey through the evolution of the American consumer, starting with the end of World War II. He argues that understanding the forces that have shaped our consumer culture can help us make more informed choices today.
Interesting. So why start with 1945? What was so significant about that period?
Well, it marked the end of a devastating war and the beginning of an unprecedented economic boom. Soldiers returned home eager to start families, buy homes, and indulge in those consumer goods that were scarce during wartime.
So there was this pent-up demand coupled with a surge in availability and access to consumer credit that fueled this post-war economic expansion.
Exactly, and this wasn't just a coincidence. The government actually encouraged this consumption as a way to keep the economy humming.
So this period after World War II was characterized by a sense of shared prosperity with a strong middle class and relatively low levels of income inequality.
Yes, the economic gains were broadly distributed, and there was a sense of optimism and upward mobility. But here's the catch. As we move into the 1970s and beyond, things start to shift. Globalization and technological advancements lead to a more uneven distribution of wealth.
So we start to see a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Cultural expectations lagged behind these economic realities. Americans continued to aspire to that middle-class lifestyle, even as it became increasingly difficult to achieve.
And that's where the debt trap comes in.
Precisely. Faced with stagnant wages and rising aspirations, many Americans turned to debt to finance their desired lifestyle. We see this play out in the housing bubble, the student loan crisis, and the explosion of consumer credit.
So we're still dealing with the legacy of this disconnect between expectations and reality.
Absolutely. And this leads to a lot of frustration and disillusionment. We're bombarded with images of affluence and success, yet for many, those aspirations feel increasingly out of reach.
So what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from this historical perspective? How do we break free from this cycle?
I think Housel's point is that understanding the forces that have shaped our consumer culture can help us make more informed choices today. It's about recognizing those ingrained expectations, those narratives that tell us we need to buy certain things to be happy or successful, and challenging those messages.
So it's about becoming more conscious consumers, more intentional about our spending habits, and more aware of the influences that shape our financial decisions.
Exactly. It's about aligning our spending with our values, not with some externally imposed standard of success. It's about finding contentment and financial security on our own terms. Now let's wrap things up by circling back to where we started. Remember Ronald Reed, the gas station attendant and janitor who quietly amassed a fortune of $8 million?
Yes. His story really set the stage for this entire deep dive. What's the key lesson we can learn from his extraordinary journey?
His story teaches us that building wealth isn't about being a genius investor or taking huge risks. It's about consistency, patience, and letting the power of compound interest work its magic over time.
It sounds like he embodied many of the principles we've been discussing, living below his means, saving diligently, and investing wisely. And it's inspiring to know that someone living a seemingly ordinary life can achieve such extraordinary financial success.
It really challenges our assumptions about what it takes to build wealth, and it underscores the importance of focusing on those fundamental principles rather than chasing get-rich-quick schemes or trying to time the market.
So we've been unpacking Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money, and it's clear that our own behavior and the stories we tell ourselves about money play a huge role in our financial well-being. But I'm curious, before we wrap up this deep dive, is there one final provocative thought from the book that you think our listeners should really mull over?
Remember how we talked about those narratives that can sometimes overshadow the numbers? Well, Housel ends the book with a fascinating point. If wealth is more about behavior than smarts, which of your own financial habits need to change to actually align with your goals and not just follow the latest trends or what everyone else is doing?
That's such a great question to ponder.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others or making decisions based on what we think we should be doing rather than what truly aligns with our values and aspirations.
Exactly. It's about tuning out the noise and getting really honest with yourself about what you want your financial life to look like, and then making choices that support that vision, even if those choices go against conventional wisdom or what's popular at the moment.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I know I've learned a lot about myself and my own relationship with money, and I'm sure our listener has too.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing I hope our listener takes away from this deep dive, it's the understanding that financial success is not a destination. It's an ongoing journey of self-discovery, learning, and adaptation.
It's about embracing the complexities of human psychology, those unseen forces that shape our financial decisions, and finding a path that aligns with our values and aspirations.
Well said. And remember, true wealth is not just about accumulating money. It's about having the freedom and flexibility to live a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling.
So to our listener out there, think about one specific takeaway from our deep dive into Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money and how you can apply it in your own financial life.
Because when you understand the psychology behind your financial decisions, you can start to make choices that lead to genuine wealth and well-being.
And that's it for this deep dive into the psychology of money. We'll catch you next time.
Welcome to the show we're in. News to share, where to begin. Free sides to every tale we tell. The truth is here, it's ringing bells. Dive in deep, let's take a look. In every twist and turn we took. For glory lies within the truth. We're chasing facts, it's our pursuit. Stories break and come alive, digging deeper to survive. In the chaos, hear the call, uncovering the truth for all.